competences.
Oh, you ready?
It's an important part of the process because the feedback finishes today, as in 1 hour and 30 minutes. So if we have anything that is relevant and important that we want to provide as feedback, you have 90 minutes left to do it before Jackie's saying no more. After what, maybe 3 months of intensive consultation and feedback process, this is it. This is the end. So we're looking forward to hearing about the model again. And if you have anything, please provide it either during the session or in the chat, or if there's something that really is important, you can email Jackie directly, and maybe Jackie, we can pop your email into the chat at some point as well, which I think may have happened already. There we go.
So Tony, I've just put the survey there. We usually survey you at the end, but I'm going to flip this today and survey at the start. And in there, there's some questions that Jackie will get feedback for Jackie. So you can give feedback along the way. You can do it in the chat. Certainly ask Jackie, and you can do it on this form as well. So multiple forms of feedback.
Yep. Whatever you do it soon. That's the key. Do it quickly. So we won't delay too much longer. Just start with an acknowledgement of country, and I'm on the IRGUPO countries of the Darling Downs, and we just acknowledge them as those ancestral lands that our universities, wherever we're located, are based on, and pay our respects to elders past and present as the traditional custodians of knowledge of those lands. Okay, I don't think we'll worry too much maybe about an introduction, but if you do think it's important, Jackie, feel free to
introduce
say whatever you need to. But obviously the focus of tonight is the International Competences for Undergraduate Psych. So I'll hand over to Jackie now for take us through some slides, and just thank you so much in advance, Jackie, for this opportunity to hear firsthand about how this project has been progressing and where it's at now. Okay.
Thanks very much, Tony, and thanks very much the SciEd team, including Karen and Tanya and all the committee members who help support this roundtable, which is just such a fantastic platform for communication amongst psychology educators. And thanks for allowing me to talk about a little bit more about ICUP. And as Tony said, tonight is the last opportunity really to have feedback before we do another revision over the next couple of weeks. So do utilise chat or whatever you can. So I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of where I am at, the Bigamble countries, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And also I'd like to, by way of illustrating that last sentence, just really express my appreciation to the APEP team, which consists of, as you probably know already, of Pat Dudgeon and Joe Alexi and Belle Selkirk. And they've been really engaged in giving us feedback. Sometimes it's been difficult, as a lot of feedback has been. It's been difficult or wonderful, and, you know, all sorts of variations in the feedback, but always really interesting, really challenging for us to consider. And there have been changes made, but maybe not reflecting, for me anyway, in thinking about all that feedback that people have been giving us, including many of you, just how much it sort of has changed our thinking in this model. So I really appreciate all of that, as we've acknowledged here. Just like to also acknowledge my co-leader, Susan Nolan, who should be sleeping, but maybe like many of you, maybe she's marking. She said she has to mark all of this week, and so she might be up late, very late or very early in the USA doing that. So again, also appreciating that you guys are here, because I know that academic life these days is very pressured. So thank you to all the other ICUPO members and the IRGUPO members, many of whom are here. So here's the overview. We have some discussion questions, but I'll just go through each of those sections and along the way pause and have questions and discussion and look at the chat and so on. And there'll be a little green signal. Tony or Karen, just remind me to stop at those points, and certainly there'll be more toward the end. So next slide, please, Karen. Oh, no, Tony. Thank you, Tony. So these are the discussion or feedback questions which Tony and Karen shared in the emails. And also Karen has very kindly put some of these questions also into that little survey that's open to you all now. So if you already made up your mind, you can complete it now and sort of go home and have next slide, please. So the aims were to create this model, which we had the first version in June last year, but we've been revising it ever since. Really to consider the model in terms of guidance for local and especially national, and to seek support for the model. Next slide, please. So the rationale, you can see that there, but I'd just like to focus a little bit more on multiple stakeholders. For us in Australia, less than 50% of our undergraduate graduates go on to become psychologists, and they go into many other careers. And so the stakeholders for us in Australia and in Britain and in the USA and probably other nations as well are much broader than, say, Germany, where 90% of their undergraduates actually go on to become professional psychologists. And we argue that there's much value, or there can be much value, to undergraduate psychology education. Julie Hume from the UK makes a really good case for this. And even if you're not that interested in community or societal impact, as I've argued previously, having our undergraduate psychology graduates be ambassadors for us as a discipline and as a profession is priceless. And I'm just reiterating Simon Crow's words here from 2012. So really, if we can create those graduates who know the usefulness and value of psychological science and the professions, the professional psychology and all its different specializations, surely that's a big bonus for us. So if we're just selfish like that, we're just selfish aim, it's worth looking at increasing the value of undergraduate psychology. Next slide, please, Tony. So we are focusing on foundational psychology competences at the undergraduate level. And this is in contrast to a previous 2016 international project, as you can see down there, the professional psychology competences. Lots of similarities in the words, but I've just highlighted here that kind of broader context and thus broader stakeholders for the foundational psychology competences. So for professional psychology competences, it's all about professional psychology practice settings, okay, and that particular role. Whereas for foundational, yes, many of them will go on to become professional psychologists, but for us here in Australia, over half will not. Next slide, please, Karen. And you know all this. So the method of this project, we've been going intensely since October was our first meeting for the committee. So we have a central committee. We also have a reference or advisory group across many nations, as you can see there. We work very hard to have inclusive strategies within and outside of our meetings. And we've been consulting with IRGUPO, and our general approach there is consensus seeking and iterative stakeholder consultation, as you can see. Next slide, please, Tony. We've been influenced by these different frameworks and contexts. We've considered over 40 curriculum frameworks and very much influenced by cultural responsiveness work and psychological literacy and global citizenship. Next slide, please. We can talk about that later on, but I just want to tell you what our next steps are before we get into the model. So as Tony emphasised, now is the time to give us feedback. And we'll be creating that gamma version. We'll be taking it to various working groups and committees over the next few weeks and making final adjustments. Then we'll take it to the International Congress of Psychology in Prague in July. And we've got some sessions there for some more international feedback. And then we might then revise it again before finalising it for the time being. Meanwhile, building resources. So here's the model, and there's these two core categories of competences. And if you just animate by clicking once, please, Tony, you can see over there in that circle, there it is, psychological knowledge and research. And then click again, and we have the first 4 of the 5 psychology competence categories around the bottom there. And then finally, click again, we have in the center, personal and professional development. And so it's somewhat student-centered, and you might see some overlap with some other well-known approaches. Next slide, please. Tony. Okay, so here's the APAC model. And what I've done for this presentation is used highlighting to show you that this is my this is my translation of that document that you might have already seen, the mapping of the ICUP and the APAC standards. Okay, so the ICUP competences and the APAC standards, and that document's available to you through Tony and Karen's emailing to you. And so this is the mapping of ICUP onto the APAC competences. Immediately you'll see that there's no detail in terms of the knowledge content or fields. And question mark for number 6, we can have a discussion about what does that mean over drinks sometime. But probably not time for it now. So next slide, please. Now we go the other way. So here's the ICUP competences and how APAC maps onto them. So first of all, just to acknowledge that we've got a description of the competence category, and then I've greened what I think the APAC standards actually cover. Note also that we have fairly high-level verbs or operators in the ICUP competences, because these are endpoint, for the most part, endpoint competences in the undergraduate degree. Next one, please. All right, so research methodologies and methods. And a big gap here from my personal perspective is that we don't have number 2. We used to have that. In the revision of the APAC standards in 2019, it was dropped. Okay. We can talk about that over drinks as well sometime. Okay, next one. So this is the first competence category where this word reflexivity comes up, and there's about 2 more at least. And this is a very important concept, which we can discuss a little bit more later on. But you can see that it's a little bit missing from the values and ethics area, but it does pop up in APAC, as you probably already know, in cultural responsiveness, which is the next one. Number 3, probably a lot of you do that already, but interestingly, APAC doesn't have it as a standard. Next category, please. Okay, so there it is, reflexivity. So it's in the culture, as we'll see in a minute, it's in the APAC standards, and there's fairly good overlap with 1 and 2. But we now introduce these intervention competences. This is the first one, or first explicit one anyway. Can you go to the next slide, please, Tony? And just so you know, there's some terms and definitions section in the document, ICUP document, and we took the intervention definition from the previous work on professional psychology competences, but for many of these definitions, we have an explanatory note because a lot of people were saying, oh no, undergraduates can't do interventions, okay? So we try to explain it here that it can be kind of fairly low-level interventions, and many of you do work integrated learning and so on, where you do something like an intervention, or at least propose one, or evaluate existing ones, and so on. So we'll just keep going. Next slide, please. So I was talking to APAC the other day and just prepared this slide just as an illustration. So we have the Cultural Responsiveness 1.2 APAC, right? And you can see that 4.1 and 4.2 from the ICUP map onto it pretty well. There's that word reflexivity, but we've made it a separate one because we think it's so important. And the cultural competence, cultural responsiveness, but there is not that intervention one in the APAC standards. Next slide, please. The other thing that we're talking about, and you can just do the next animation too, please, Tony. We're talking about challenges and maybe how do you teach and assess these ICUP competences. And many of the examples that we already have in Appendix 2 of that very long document are actually from Australia, and the result of the really great work that the APEP-COP is doing, some of which was demonstrated at the AusPLAT conference over the last couple of offerings. So it is possible to do this kind of thing, including that propose, implement, and/or evaluate interventions. And it's interesting because, for example, with EuroPsy, they don't believe that this kind of thing can be done. And already in Australia, we are doing it. In the UK, we're doing this kind of thing as well. So it is possible. Of course, you don't become it's not at the professional psychology competence level, but they can dip their waters, they can dip their toes into these waters in terms of application. Next slide, please, Tony. I think I forgot to pause earlier on, so sorry about that. Remind me to pause at the end of this. Of the model. Okay, so hey, what do you actually notice about this slide?
There is no overlap.
Zero. Nothing in the APAC competences. So have a think about that one. If you wanted to make your psychology program unique, you could just emphasize these competences and say that you're very much focused on producing critical thinkers for the future of Australian society, whatever. So it could be a marketing advantage there if you integrated some of this stuff into your program. And you can see there's an intervention one there. I forgot to highlight that, but there's an intervention one that was a little bit unusual. But yeah, we just decided to be game because we think that there's a vast lack of critical thinking. Well, at least I do. Think there's a last huge lack of critical thinking out there, and our undergraduate psychology graduates are a big proportion of who is out there in society. Next slide, please. Okay, communication. So there's a bit of overlap there, which is great. We have an emphasis on technology that we've had some feedback from some people that we don't have enough emphasis on that number 3. So that's interesting too. Next one, please. And then finally, again, a total lack from the APAC. And of course, these are the more challenging competences because they integrate and apply very much the other competences. And so again, the reflexivity, and this is around knowledge of self. And then the other 2 interventions there are in the workplace and in the community. And you'll see that there's a very sneaky implementation or intervention in number 3 as well with the word implement. Okay. So these are really number 7 are really the capstone competences in many ways. because they integrate many of the other ones. So I'm just going to go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Tony. And that's just a reminder of that degree of overlap with APAC. And then the next slide, please. So this is just my summary of the mismaps. So ICUP doesn't have that detail with respect to knowledge content, which many of you will painstakingly have to map for the APAC accreditation visits, right? All that detail. But on the flip side, there's all this other stuff that's demanding. And so integrate and apply. So that's obviously where psychological literacy, that is our psychological literacy. And it's particularly relevant to those interventions, those competences there. Ooh, sorry. And then the reflexivity, which keeps popping up, and critical thinking, nothing there. And then undertaking research, which seems to have disappeared in the last revision of the APAC competences. Next one, please, Tony. All right, so there's two ways to look at this. One is, well, what about APAC and what about the national level? And why would APAC consider the ICUP model as a reference model in terms of revising its standards? It's easiest just to ignore it, really, because it's just guidance. But maybe it should be looking more internationally. And here we have a guidance model that reflects international thinking for undergraduate or foundational psychology competences. So when the next revision of APAC comes around, you can be assured that we'll be knocking on their door, okay? Until then, they're kind of ignoring us, but it's okay. We'll be meanwhile knocking on the international doors. So at your institution, so why would you do so? You've already got huge workloads, huge demands from the APAC accreditation. But really, why should you do so? Is around, again, having that kind of international mindset and even perhaps turning it to your own advantage in terms of a marketing positive, in terms of if you can say that you're mapping onto the ICUP model as well as the APAC standards, then some students might find that quite attractive. So that's the most, I guess, selfish reason why you might do it. If you don't have any, if you're not very idealistic like I am, and thinking that some of those competences are just important to our survival, and we're not really, I guess, making the most of our undergraduate programs by having competences like that and providing and empowering our undergraduate students with those competences that can really make a difference in their personal lives, in their work lives, by helping them develop those competences that will help them to really utilize their psychology in their everyday life, as Julie Hume says. So whether it's personal domain, work domain, and work can be both being a professional psychologist as well as many of the other kinds of career destinations that psychology graduates go into, as well as making a community contribution by utilizing their knowledge, skills, attitudes that they may have acquired through their undergraduate program. So just to get the questions kicked off, you can discuss any of those question marks there or anything else you want. But in talking to the DPRET forum the other day, Jason Lodge raised the question about assessment, and we're still working on that, but we already know that with AI and all those sorts of challenges that people, but through their innovation and their extreme efforts, have been meeting that challenge. I know it's been a huge challenge, but you've been forced to actually meet it, and you've come to the party all the educators out there, and it's made easier if you share those innovations that you've come up with, of course, and how to do that. So I'm fairly optimistic because I can see it happening. In terms of gaps, I've already talked about that. John Rees raised that. In terms of the nitty-gritty of assessment, I think we've still got a long way to go, especially assuring those individual competences, if that's the way you want to go. That's a challenge in any kind of quality assessment. Anyway, so I didn't pause at all. Sorry, the green light was not a green light. I didn't even notice it, and should have been bold red for me to notice it. But anyway, I think that I might ask Karen or Tony or someone to actually see where the questions are, and or whether there's anything in the chat as yet about this model and what we've been doing with it lately. I can tell you that there's been a lot of interesting feedback, and we certainly acknowledge the national and local constraints that people have. It's been nice to see people taking it on. So, for example, Ali from Flinders has been thinking about this in terms of revising her program learning outcomes for undergraduate, which is wonderful to see. Warms my heart, Ali, so thank you. And really, it's about opportunities like what Ali and others are taking right now, where you are having to revise or review your program and seeing where some of this can fit. And another question really is, how can we make it easier for people who want to do that? Okay. And we're really at the beginning of all that. And we've been having some conversations lately, as Tony will attest to, about, okay, we're almost, in fact, the feedback lately has been not so much about the content. We've been doing this iteratively. It's not so much about the content now, but the implementation. And so we've started to talk about that and some of the mechanisms that we can put in place. But we're only just starting. So we're just at the beginning, and we'll be reaching out to many of you to help us do that. And we've got a few ideas about the sort of structures, whether they be formal or informal structures, networks or whatever. We're doing that, and feel free to put forward your ideas in that regard around implementation. So I'll be quiet and
maybe I can mute Jackie or something for a bit. So if you weren't familiar with the model, you've at least had a chance to see the structure, the 7 groupings, the 24 specific competences, and Jackie tried to give you the background to the process that's been followed, but she really couldn't do justice to it. It's been an enormously complicated and effortful process. So the questions that have been posed, the 4 specific ones, are ones that you can focus on, or if you have other comments that you might like to provide, we're quite happy to hear those as well. Anyone want to kick it off? Phoebe, I was thinking about you during that talk for a very good reason. So you've designed undergraduate psychology degrees, including a framework outside of APAC's Foundation Competencies. Did you want to talk about that one just briefly?
And with Tony's help, I might add, our curriculum was designed not only based on the APAC standards, and we're in a lucky position where we were designing everything from scratch recently, but also the APEP standards or guidelines, and then the American Psychological Association guidelines 3.0 that just came out. We had a bit of a draft of those before they were even published, so we were able to cover all 3 frameworks within our curriculum, which was quite exciting, and we have used that in the marketing. But something that just stood out to me, Jackie, in your talk was the critical thinking and problem solving. So I think we have a bit of that thanks to the APA standards, but I think that stands out as something that will help psychology deal with, how do I put it, the takeover by AI. I think the critical thinking and problem solving is going to become even more important in the coming years. So yeah, I think that's going to be a really important one to include.
Thank you. And if you're interested in what those guidelines are, just Google APA 3.0 guidelines, and you will quickly come across them. And keep your eyes out for a special issue of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology, where there's a whole bunch of papers coming out this year around how the APA 3.0 guidelines have been used in various contexts. And Phoebe, there's even a mention of UTS's adoption in one of those papers that's coming out during the year. So that's a kind of a parallel example of how something might prove helpful if you do have that opportunity to rethink or redesign, from the program level. But not everyone's got that opportunity. Sometimes everything's already done. You're teaching and have been for many, many years in an undergraduate context. So what would be, does anyone want to describe briefly a different kind of context where these kinds of competences might be useful in some way that you could perceive? Can't really call on Liz. I think she's walking to her car.
I think this might actually be useful outside of the academic side of things into the industry and community as well. It can be probably used as a tool for writing effective position descriptions for potential graduates recruitments, so that there's clear mapping of what the employer is expecting versus the skill sets and attributes that the students have. So it'll be a consistent language across the entire graduate life cycle, starting from education all the way into practice. So I think that will be an interesting use of this model as well outside of classroom.
Thanks. And that's it says Ed Designer in your little description there. So I'm guessing you've got some awareness there of what what's required in terms of designing degrees to achieve certain goals. Any other contexts that we can think of right now?
Hi, everybody. Sorry, Tony. My name is Ali Enright. I'm the Deputy Teaching Program Director, focusing in course quality at Flinders University in psychology, and I'm also the course coordinator for all of our undergraduate programs here at Flinders in psychology. So those are new hats that I put on this year. So just bear with me, if you will, but I've been really enjoying getting to know what I've been calling the ICUP model. So I've had a different pronunciation. I'm originally from Canada, so I'll blame it on that perhaps, although it's meant to be international. Look, for me, it's been the context is that we've had an established psychology program for a number of years. Lydia Woodyat is our teaching program director. She's an absolute legend, both with regards to her teaching effectiveness, but holistic approach to supporting students. And so we took it as an opportunity to revise our course learning outcomes, or what maybe others refer to as program learning outcomes. And the feedback, I suppose, is there's two elements for myself in trying to do this. One was thinking about how do I actually apply the ICUP or this model to developing new learning outcomes that kind of tap lots of different competencies. So the usability of the model was a little bit overwhelming at times, and trying to think about how do I actually go about applying this. And the process that we took was just having a right crack after reading the various competencies, and then sharing that across some of our learning and teaching leaders in psychology, revising some of those drafts, and then sharing them at our annual course quality advisory committee or group, if you will, which includes both psychology leadership academics, it includes our course reps, it includes industry representatives, and it also includes an academic outside of our discipline area. And so we've gone through a tiny bit of an iterative process. And as Jackie mentioned, I've also sent them off to her to sort of say, hey, can you have a look and see how we've gone with this? So that was our sort of process and approach to doing it. But I certainly found it was a little bit challenging to take the document and try to apply it. And so the solution for me is in my mind in thinking about what we could offer. And I know you've probably thought about all the things I'm about to say, but you've got some good examples of how to apply this in teaching and assessments. And so really it's just, developing the pool at the program learning outcome level as well, so that we could get some examples of how you collectively bring these competencies together in a nice way, which still gives people the opportunity to really tailor their own programs or have uniqueness within their programs. So I'm not one of those people who's particularly worried about having cookie cutter type of programs, internationally. The other tiny bit of feedback that I suppose I would offer is that like you've captured already in the summary of the model, psychology is sort of distinct in that we're not training people for a very specific role necessarily, unless it is that sort of clinical psychology, and that there's diverse career outcomes potentially for our undergraduate psych students. And it's always a challenge for us to shrink the gap between the current industry needs and postgraduate employment rate for our undergraduate psych students. So we know there's a gap there, that we have a bleeding industry. These psych graduates are massively needed, and yet the post-graduation employment rate isn't as high as what you would anticipate given the industry demand. And so I think speaking a little bit to Yogita's point, which I had never considered industry kind of considering it as a language, but certainly some of the work that I've been doing with career readiness and employability, having some consistent terminology for our staff to then essentially cue students to their professional development and the skills and attributes that they're learning across the suite of undergraduate topics or courses, depending on where you are, I think would be really useful. So making sure that we're capturing those industry needs would be having some evidence that we're doing that, or feedback from industry would be really important. But I think from a satisfaction point of view, I'm really excited. I think this is a really fantastic push in the right direction. And I also think it's really exciting for our students. I love the idea of them being ambassadors to why doing psychology undergraduate training would be really effective. My concern is that we've got a long way to go, because currently, at least our psych undergraduates don't know the skills that they have, don't know the organizations who value those skills, and certainly don't do a fantastic job at articulating those skills yet.
It's a universal problem. I think Julie Hume also has been, UK has had that problem for a while too. So it's there, and it's about being explicit and using portfolios and things like that to help the students to make it explicit to themselves. But I guess Janie might have some answers for you.
Putting the spotlight on you, Janie.
I can violently agree with everyone. I don't want to be that person that says, oh, I've written something on that, but I've written something on that. But I know many people here know about the report. We've been flashing around for the last couple of months. But yeah, it is just because we know it and we know they belong in lots of places, translating that to them without deterring them from the clinical pathway or feeling like we're deterring, or them feeling like we're deterring them is really tricky. And I agree, this model is really helpful in giving us some of that terminology. So yeah, no, just agreeing with what everyone else has said.
Is there a secondary teacher perspective that needs to be talked about, given we have some very good representatives here?
Is that at me, Tony?
Go, Karen.
I just love the idea that if you're going to, so for me, when I first look at it, if it's opens up those rich conversations of what you're already doing in your programs. And Ellie, it sounds like you've done all that, and you have to have those conversations about if it's not in there, why not? Like, it mightn't go in there, but I think it's even richer to justify why not. or what's too much in a curriculum. But for a secondary one, I love anything with those languages can be used and adapted. We need something in secondary, because at the moment we tend to try and follow what's first year psychology, and it's just too much content. But on the other hand, it's really interesting, Jackie, when you talk about those skills lacking. To me, I think their priority, if we're going to go to creative and critical thinking, but critical thinking, we've got to have those skills as well. So they're connected and very much embedded in our course in secondary across Australia, not so much across the world. We're kind of leading that area.
Excellent.
Yeah, but the language is, and getting those big conceptual ideas, this is a great start. But again, how do you unpack it? That's the next step going forward. Sorry.
Thank you.
Michelle, would you be able to reflect briefly on what you think APAC's take on this might be, or is it too difficult to summarize that in a quick way? Just need to unmute as well.
Jacqueline, you certainly haven't been ignored. This project has been taken very seriously. So I sent it out, first of all, for feedback to two of APAC's consultants, one who was a former AAC chair and director, another who was also a former AAC member. Thereafter, I referred their feedback to the AAC itself for feedback from the members and collated feedback from, when I say AAC, the Accreditation Assessment Committee members. That feedback was then collated and compiled into a letter that I drafted for your organisation, and that was then sent in as a board paper. I think one of the tricky sides that may have stalled the feedback process is question around endorsement. So that's potentially where the work that I've done has ended up sitting with powers above my own for further reflection, deliberation, and decision making. So certainly we do have feedback for you, and I'm more than happy to stay on the line to read out the feedback, or, you know, to give you some kind of unofficial email perhaps, so that we meet the deadline for today, because I appreciate the pressures and the need to coordinate moving forward. So, you know, I would want you to be in that informed position, but I can say that a lot of legwork has been done at my end to ensure that we've given you a response, and I will certainly be following up tomorrow what has happened in terms of, you know, the necessary communications that should have reached you and don't appear to have done so. I guess, Tony, thank you for the invitation to comment further. The competencies, so to begin with, I was slightly jarred because when you were referencing the standards, I was automatically going to the criteria, not to the graduate competencies. The graduate competencies are something that APAC inherits from the board, from the Psychology Board of Australia. They're not actually something we contribute to. So we are responsible for unpacking them. We're responsible for updating the evidence guide around the competencies, and that's actually a project that's underway at the moment. moment. I'm here today because I don't want to ignore this. I want to better understand the complexities of the discipline. I want to better understand what constitutes really good outcomes for students and for the profession. So, you know, I am here tonight to undertake some professional development of my own. But I think that, you know, the mapping and the alignment of the competencies is a really important thing. I personally have always been a massive advocate of transnational education, having, you know, studied undergraduate courses in Germany and also having research there. So, you know, I do appreciate the benefits of having global perspectives. And I think that one of the difficulties that, you know, one of the difficulties we're likely to experience moving forward in this international space is, again, the reality that we're dealing with a national board that is primarily responsible for putting together the competencies and is in the process of reviewing the competencies at the moment. Alongside a regulator, APRA, and general understanding of the board that its jurisdiction is within the Australian healthcare context. So this is going to be an emerging issue for many providers, and some of you have probably already noticed that that there is a new section in the annual report around offshore placements. So, you know, this offshore context and this notion of what's happening internationally, while, you know, very rich and fertile ground for education and for teaching and learning, within the competency space of being able to deliver safe and competent psychology services and practices within the Australian healthcare context is something that I think we're going to need to be mindful of with reference to, you know, to the CBA's position and its overarching jurisdiction. So that's where I can see a little bit of friction. I'm delighted that APEP has fed into this. They're such a collaborative mob, and it's just lovely working with them and interacting with them at all times. I would really appreciate a copy of your slides, if I may, because I think it would be wonderful to feed your mapping and your observations and, you know, potential areas whereby we might be able to strengthen the standards. That is something APAC can do and does do. You know, that opportunity to be looking through the lens of your project at the APAC accreditation standards, I think would be a really valuable exercise, and your writing would be a marvelous tool in that context. So I think that's about all I have to say. But Tony, you wear multiple hats in this area as well. You know, you're one of our very valued AAC members, and, you know, a very experienced assessor and team leader. Do you have other thoughts that, you know, that run alongside what I've just said?
The overriding thought in terms of that set of foundational competencies, which is included in the APAC standards, is it seems to be a problem to change anything. So you've alluded to it, but really the big issue is APAC is contracted, I think is the correct word, by CBA, and that's been renewed. So thank goodness for that. But that process of changing anything doesn't happen easily, because whatever is proposed still has to end up going to the CBA for approval. So you can see the difficulty there. If CBA doesn't like something, then that's almost the end of the picture. However, I think we touched on this briefly at our last AusPLAT conference, where there was a pretty interesting discussion on, does undergraduate psychology need to be fully accredited in the same way that postgrad programs are? And there's some arguments for loosening the grip, if you like, that currently CBA has on the whole process from beginning to end. So maybe there's an argument to be made for loosening that grip a bit. so that these kinds of competences can feature in undergraduate program learning outcomes. I think the thing that kind of encourages me a little bit is exactly what Phoebe was talking about. Any provider can choose to add things into their suite of undergraduate offerings. And, if it's the APA 3.0 guidelines, which are really quite good, by the way, because you can see value and it helps you to articulate better what you're trying to do, well, that's an option. These international competences for undergraduate psych will be substantial. They'll be talked about across many jurisdictions. So there's always that option to add things onto what we currently have as well, acknowledging the extra work that actually generates. So there's a couple of thoughts there. How are we going for time?
Can I just reply
Not too
to
bad.
Michelle, if that's okay? Michelle, I had no idea, of course, that there was all this activity happening underwater, like your calm duck, obviously, or APAC is, or something, calm duck, and we can't see what's happening underwater.
Behind the scenes,
Thank you. Yeah, behind the scenes, getting my analogies mixed up.
Metaphors, that's right. It's
I just want to thank you for working on it. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. And like I say, it's something that bears the draft letter bears the chair of the board's name, which is why I'm reluctant to actually issue anything that's on the letterhead. But I'm more than happy to copy and paste the the crux of the letter as I drafted it months ago. I'm so sorry that it hasn't come your way yet, but I can copy and paste that into an email this evening, so that you have the nuts and bolts of the feedback from all of the subject matter experts and the assessors who have actually, and consultants who work with APAC, who have fed into that feedback loop for you.
Excellent. And the other thing is that, yes, we've been learning about the difference between getting feedback and seeking endorsement. And we've really pulled back from the endorsement. And I'm pretty sure I communicated that to you, to APAC at least, that we've kind of pulled back from that, because we're much more interested in getting feedback first, and, getting so they can influence the model. And the feedback has continually influenced it in a positive way. Sometimes the feedback has been hard to integrate, but we've done our best to do that, or to do a reply in a considered and positive way, and so on. But anyway, so the message I'm trying to give you, Michelle, is that I'll probably follow up with an email, but feedback first, endorsement can be later.
Look, that's great to know. And I'm just getting into my if it allows me to get into my folder. I've been having internet issues, as some people can relate to.
I think we certainly appreciate now that's
but here's the letter here, and there you go, Jacqueline. The 19th of the 2nd was when I drafted it at 9:07 a.m. And I wrote the cover sheet I titled it ICUPO project. I'm sorry, I don't know where I got that extra O from, but the cover sheet stated the 26th of the 2nd, 2024.
The O is actually correct.
Don't apologize, and we'll just go from here. That's fine.
But I don't know if other people are interested in the feedback, I'm more than happy to share it verbally. What would you like? Have we got time? Are you interested?
We do have time, but I was also, just before we do that, just want to check to see if anyone who hasn't had a chance yet would like to contribute anything, so you don't feel like you've missed out, given we're down to, like the final 30 minutes of the match. It's full time in 30 minutes time, so we don't want to kind of miss that opportunity. So anyone who hasn't spoken up, or there's anything that occurs to you out of that conversation, do you want to ask about?
Well, I was just going to pick up on, I'm Steve Cumming, I'm the Deputy Dean at Western Sydney School of Psychology. I was just going to pick up on something Ali had said earlier, which I was about to say as well, which is like I've got a group of international agents coming to talk to us tomorrow, and having a language to describe competencies, particularly for those students who don't get into honours and don't get into masters, I think is a really nice way of thinking about these sets of competencies as well.
Steve, we've tried from the very beginning to make it clear that many people choose to do other things other than pursue postgraduate psych, and we want to make sure their choices are endorsed, encouraged, validated, etc. We just want them to feel like doing undergraduate psych is great.
Yeah.
Anyone else who we haven't heard from? And if not, we'll get Michelle to give us the gist of the APAC response.
The APAC feedback.
It's certainly it's kind of good that we've discovered that.
All right. So I think the overarching intro, I will be editing a little, all right, just so I won't be quite so fluent as if I read out the full letter, but I'll edit as I go. So we note that significant work is condensed into this document. It is worthy of much praise for the ambitious goal that the committee has set for itself, and it is heartening to see so many Australians taking the lead. In terms of our overarching feedback, the stated goal of this project is a set of foundational psychology competencies that can be applied internationally. There are some remarkable aspects to the beta.RI version of the, or R1 version of the ICUP document, because it was generated by an international group and for an international application through a hybrid process of consensus and democracy. Additional focus on readability and usability would enhance what is already a useful and relevant document. For example, the authors may wish to, and I have 3 bullet points here. 1, consider endnotes as a referencing technique so that readers can focus on content. 2, develop an A3 poster with circles and competencies for clarity and accessibility. And 3, edit content with the end users in mind. Specific feedback. So this relates to the first question. Do you have any suggestions for change to this model? The reflections on content. There is some overprescription of content areas that might be argued as aspirational. For example, the inclusion of geopolitical content, focus, and the extent of development and exploration of personal values and ethics are likely to challenge undergraduates and honours students. References to using psychological knowledge to enhance one's own well-being would strengthen the area of psychology-relevant interpersonal and communication skills. References to conducting or implementing assessments or interventions warrant consideration in the context of Australian undergraduate students, where the curriculum does not include the relevant content or graduate capabilities for students to be able to do this in an ethical or safe way. The reference to propose is more suitable at an undergraduate level, such that students could propose ways of evaluating interventions rather than carrying this out. Points of clarification. Specific competencies require some points of clarification. More focused definition of the practicalities of some of the psychology relevant ethics and values is needed to convert them to accessible competencies. For example, how might reflexivity, I can never say that word, I am so sorry, and I've done 2 cultural responsiveness courses. Reflexivity be assessed, and the level of complexity of the moral and ethical dilemmas that require evaluation. The extent to which undergraduates can and should conduct intervention, psychotherapeutic or not, is questionable. A real delineation of undergraduate versus honours level competence doesn't appear, despite a blending of what might be argued as applying to both, while there does appear to be an exclusion of others, such as assessment and testing. This is an international document, and therefore there is a need for terminology that will be appropriate in many settings or different settings. Issues may arise with the use of foundational competencies in that this term overlaps with APAC's terminology. A clear statement in the document confirming that the term applies to the documents framework and does not align with any other frameworks would set clear parameters and avoid potential confusion. Conclusions. Based on the above mentioned points, APAC suggests that the bar for examination of personal values is set too high. Inclusion of geopolitical factors needs to be specified. Requirement for students to conduct or implement assessments or interventions must be supported by the curriculum and designated graduate capabilities. Distinction between honours and undergraduate needs to be drawn and clarified for an international audience. And ICUPO foundational competencies are distinguished from other frameworks that draw upon the same terminology. In terms of B, would you consider encouraging academic organisational units to contribute teaching and assessment examples? We've said this would be useful, especially in the quote unquote newer areas. And the final question, do you have a process for us to eventually request that you consider endorsing the model? And this is, I think, the contentious part. A further request from the ICUPO's Central Committee and an official response from APAC is appropriate in these circumstances. We look forward to receiving further updates in due course and wish the committee continued success in its endeavours.
Thank you.
Well, it's a very...
That's a lot. I know that's a lot, which is why I'm suggesting I copy and paste the key answers into an email for you.
Yeah, they're great. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jackie started off with her email address, but we can certainly give it to you again if there's any issues there.
That'd be great, Tony. Thank you.
Given it's been a great discussion so far, I'm just not sure if there's anything else we were hoping or planning to do. So I'll check in with Jackie and Karen. Any other steps we were hoping to achieve tonight? I know we've got our own evaluation, so that helps us to know whether the roundtables are doing what we want them to. So that link was provided to you right at the start in the chat. And anything else?
Karen very kindly within that evaluation is also asking some of the same questions as what was in that slide. And certainly, Karen, the slides can just be, I don't know, how do you usually handle this?
So between Tony and I, we'll get the recordings and we can put it up on the AusPLAT website.
Yeah, it'll just be a link from the AusPLAT website under our roundtable section.
And email us directly if needed.
You can email me if you want the slides. I'll send them to you, Michelle, anyway. But if anybody else wants them, let me know.
That would be fabulous. Thank you.
I've got your email there, Jackie. I'll just do it again in the chat.
Yeah, so this was, again, thinking now that we've probably finished the discussion. The second roundtable for the year, so Janie alluded before to the first one, which was, again, a bit similar in terms of going through their report from Canberra Uni. And there is another one planned, and I'm not sure of the date or topic. Do you have it handy, Karen, or is that still under discussion?
Oh, I've got a feeling we did decide on it.
Yeah, it's not in my mind, so I don't know whether we do have a date or topic. Anyway,
got a date, I think. Yeah, I think we've got a date. There was just maybe the topic.
Yeah. AI seems to be cropping up in every discussion. Over breakfast, we talk about AI. This is how fun it is to be in the Machen household. But anyway, I have a sense that we did want to raise some of the important issues relating to that's artificial intelligence, by the way, not academic integrity, as I've discovered recently. So yes, that may in fact have been the decision. So we'll let people know when that's coming up. And
there you go. So we've got Wednesday, the 14th of August. So book the space in now for Roundtable 3. And I think we're talking about university initiatives or AI. So
Well, definitely
certainly
it's
fits with the theme we're talking tonight, and yeah, with our roundtable one as well.
All right. Very much appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully it hasn't delayed you going home if you were at work. You were able to get home earlier. Thank you again, and really appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jackie. That's great.
No worries. And yeah, Michelle, if